One of the leading factors in determining the right watch for you is often case size. And today we continue our series looking at watches at different case sizes, the best of every case size, with 41 millimeters being the topic today. So we're gonna be breaking this down into 4 different parts. So in this one, we have a long list of watches to go through. So just for the sake of time and not making this a 2 or 3 hour video, I'm not gonna be as exhaustive in some of my descriptions of these watches, just doing a nice little drive-by and giving you a sense of what is available at 41 millimeters. I have this broken down into 4 different categories, and we're going to look at different watches of different price tiers within those categories. One being the dive watch segment, then the everyday watch segment, dress watches as the third, which I will warn right now is going to be smaller than the others, given that for dress watches, these typically like to lean a bit smaller. And then finally, rounding it out with complications, chronographs, GMTs, things of that sort. And how I am going to classify a 41 millimeter case, I am looking at things that are between 41 millimeters and 41.9 millimeters. Simple as that. So pretty exciting news, Seiko just released a new selection of Seiko 5 GMTs now available on teddybaldassarre.com. Link will be in the description if you want to give them a closer look. The watches build off the SSK models unveiled last year with the SSK 017 with this bright and scintillating yellow dial, the two-tone SSK 021 with gold tone accents on the bezel edge, and then the Pepsi, well, kind of a Pepsi, with the SSK 019. They all feature the very wearable case at 42.5 millimeters that feels much closer to that of a 40 millimeter with its compact lug-to-lug. Think SKX and its traditional wearing dimensions, 100 meters of water resistance, and its revolutionary GMT caliber when it was unveiled, the 4R34. For more information on these watches and to shop them, links will be in the description down below. We know you can buy a watch in many places nowadays, but we pride ourselves on providing a world-class customer service experience, and every purchase helps support the content we produce here, so we would greatly appreciate your business. To kick things off, we start with the dive watch category, looking at a watch at more that entry-level position from Orient. Now here's the thing with Orient, many people like to bring up the Komatsu, which I certainly think should be mentioned here as an honorable mention, but just to be a little bit different at the start here, let's look at the new Orient Mako 3. So these are the latest dive watches from Orient, which are going to look like the familiar Orient Mako style watches, but now given a nice little upgrade. You have a 41.8 millimeter case, which is going to wear much smaller with that lug-to-lug being under 47 millimeters. They're not ISO compliant dive watches, but getting some good spec in the process. F6922 movement on the inside, but most importantly here, a sapphire crystal on these watches, now really lining it up with the Komatsu. So deciding between this watch and the Komatsu really comes down to more of a preference on styling than anything else. So that's why I wanted to mention it here. Certainly deserves a mention when looking at some of the best, especially in this segment under $500 for a watch at 41 millimeters. Next up, we have the Marathon G-SAR. So Marathon is inextricably linked to military timepieces, specifically being issued in 1941 to the Allied forces. It's a Canadian brand, Swiss-made watches, and the G-SAR stands for Search and Rescue, Government Search and Rescue, and these watches were created for Canadian search and rescue operations. One notable point here, very similar to the previous point with those Mako models, the underbelly of this case, so the case itself 39 millimeters, but then that bezel on top is where you get that 41 millimeters. It makes this watch wear like a 40 millimeter on wrist, and it is a dream to wear on the wrist. The only complaint I could see with wear would be maybe the knurling of that crown could stick into some wrists if you really exaggerate the bending of your wrist, but for myself, never has been an issue. I love these watches. I love just the DNA, the deep-seated dial with the tritium tubes, and a very wearable 41 millimeters. So far, not really the typical feel on the wrist you would expect from a 41 millimeter on wrist. If you're looking for a robust German dive watch, you have to mention Sinn, and with this watch at 41 millimeters, this one gets a nod. This is the Sinn U50. Basically, this watch is the mid-size take on the larger U1, which is their professional dive watch. This comes in with a 41 millimeter case, 47 millimeter lug-to-lug, great water resistance rating, top grade SW300. I find all Sinn watches are going to have incredible regulation out of the box. You have this Germanic minimal design, tank-like build. You have the SDR variants, you have tegimented case options, which are going to have that up hardness for that case itself, going around 1200 Vickers on the Vickers hardness scale. Stainless steel that's going to be untreated around 150 to 200, give or take. Lume on these watches is fantastic. Contrast as good as any watch you're going to find out there. AR coating on both sides, looks the part, very easy to read. And this is a design style that is either going to speak to you or might not. Next up, we have the Oris Aquis, and the Aquis is not commonly associated with just any one size because it just spans so many variety of sizes and different dial options that it's hard to really fixate on what is the Aquis to own. And I don't want to say that this is the one to own, but if I had to just do a blanket recommendation for somebody that was looking at the Aquis, what is going to be the best for the most risks out there, I would say 41.5 millimeters, that option that they have here. These watches wear smaller by a byproduct of that integrated center link and how it integrates to the case. These are integrated style bracelets, making this watch wear closer to a 41 millimeter in practice, pretty reasonable on the lug to lug dimension at 48 millimeters, water resistance of 300 meters. But then you have the caliber 400 models, just over $3,000, where you're going to get that 5-day power reserve, which is class leading for the price range, and up magnetic resistance. The Aquis to me is one of those pieces that just is a set benchmark for what a watch should be at its represented price range. In similar fashion, you have to name the Tudor Black Bay. When this watch was originally unveiled in 2012, it changed the game for this brand, and originally was unveiled at 41 millimeters. So this is the classic size for the Black Bay, despite there now being so many different cases to choose from. With the latest creation at Watches and Wonders this year, I think you're getting the best of the best since probably the Smiley dial Tudor Black Bays from those early days with those ETA calibers. Now you're getting a METAS certified movement, more wearable case with its thickness as well as lug to lug dimension, nice water resistance, and then an MT caliber on the inside, which again, I will mention is going to be master chronometer certified, which is a test that not only the movement is tested, but then tested again, fully cased up. One of my favorite dive watches under $10,000 has to be the Omega Seamaster 300. Not the Diver 300, the Seamaster 300. This is kind of my contrarian underrated pick because so many people love the Diver 300. For me, this wears much better on my wrist, and I like the classic heritage design of this piece. Wears well, 41 millimeters, wears like a 40 with that lug to lug of 48 millimeters, 300 meters of water resistance, as you would assume with a watch being classified as the Seamaster 300, and an 8900 caliber on the inside, the 8912. With a no date, with that second position, when you pull the crown to that point, you're able to jump the hour hand in 1 hour increments forward and back. And with that no date, I find this to be an amazing combination in allowing me to, when traveling, really set that time appropriately. This is that modern take on that original 1957 Seamaster, broad arrow design, no helium escape valve, and bringing all that modern tech in the process, 8900 movement, 60-hour power reserve, dual barrel, isolated hour function, a lot to like with this watch. It's funny because we are talking 41 millimeters today, but when I think of this watch, I always think of 40 millimeters. And when I think of 40 millimeters, one of the first watches to come up is the lineage of where this watch came from, and that is the Rolex Submariner. So the Submariner now is a 41 millimeter watch in its modern creation and standard, but it is still a watch that wears closer to 40 millimeters. 41 millimeter case, lug to lug of 48 millimeters, reasonable thickness, water resistance of 300 meters, and now getting with the latest generation, the 3235 movements with that extended power reserve of 70 hours. I would say best in class accuracy standard out of the box. Rolex just doesn't mess around with the regulation. I find them to be very reliable across the board. 21 millimeter lugs now with this new case option. I find them still wearing pretty true to what we've basically seen from contemporary Rolex in the last 20 years. Not a big change from the previous iterations of this, but definitely a departure from those mid 20th century models that were much smaller on the wrist. And to round us out here, we have the JLC Polaris Automatic. Now this is technically not truly a dive watch, but it comes from a dive watch lineage that I think makes me want to put it in this category. So the Polaris line often is associated with this diving and alarm history, perhaps best represented by the 1968 Memobox Polaris. Now the Polaris Automatic aims to take this storied pedigree of years past and adds everyday viability with solid sporty upside. You have an in-house caliber, well decorated for the price point, 100 meters of water resistance, and with that dual crown format, you're getting a case silhouette that is rather unique, especially for more of this diving kind of everyday style hybrid. Now we transition into the everyday category, and to kick us off here, we look at a new release from Longines, a familiar name which has been in the collection for decades, but a new take on this line, and this is the Conquest 2023. The previous Conquest was known for its large crown, crown guards, and 300 meters of water resistance, which quite frankly was overkill, but had its own charm and fans of it in the process. This now has refined it down, upped the magnetic resistance with the movement on the inside, refined the bracelet, and made the dial, I think, much more appealing for a mass market type of variety, and just simply, in my opinion, looks better. Now, this is available in a 34mm case option and a 41. Hope that there will be more in the future, but no word yet. Thickness of 11.1mm, lug to lug of 49mm on the 41mm option that we're going to be looking at here. 100 meters of water resistance, so definitely a step back from the previous versions, but I still find this being more than what you could ask for a watch of this type. And an automatic L888 caliber on the inside with that 70-hour power reserve and SI balance spring to go along with it. Next up, we have the Rolex Oyster Perpetual, a name that has been around since the 1920s for Rolex. And this is a model family that is commonly associated with many different sizes, but now 41 being one of those common sizes now associated with it. Water resistance of 100 meters, 3230 movement on the inside, so you're getting that extended 70 hours of power reserve. Still now serving up as that entry-level model for Rolex. I am hearing that availability is getting better by the days with some of these models if you go for some of the less sought-after dial colors. And for retail pricing, these are watches that are incredibly hard to beat. So for Grand Seiko, they have a few watches that you could mention for 41mm in case size, but I would be off base if I did not include this as the main representing watch for Grand Seiko in a list like this. And we have the Grand Seiko SBGA 211, known as the Snowflake. This watch comes in titanium case, 41mm, wears, I would say, pretty true to size, if not slightly smaller, 100 meters of water resistance, and housing their proprietary movement, the 9R65, which is that spring drive caliber, which has now become synonymous with this just floating second-hand motion. If you've not seen my video explaining how the spring drive works in its entirety, I'll link to it down below. One thing that's important when trying to look at the mystique of the Snowflake is it was not developed in just a flash overnight. It was a watch that actually dates back to the mid-2000s to 2005 with the SBGA 011. That's where you saw a different kind of layout of the dial with the logo and where it was seated in comparison to the latest iteration, but it really took off under this new model in the 2010s with the 211. In doing so, this was the watch that simultaneously established Grand Seiko on a larger international stage. 70 hours of power reserve, bringing together those two ideas of quartz oscillation with mechanical power. This watch has absolutely helped make Grand Seiko for what it is today. If you want to throw an alternative mention in here, just to throw out another 41mm case for Grand Seiko, I'll mention the SBGA 469. Pretty good value here for that watch. 41mm case, a very striking blue dial to go along with it, with a 9R65 movement on the inside. Next, we have the Omega Aquaterra. I would say this is right along with the Oyster Perpetual and being class leading for the price segment for an everyday style watch. 41mm case here, keeping in mind that you do have a 38mm option here as well, but if you're here, you're probably not caring about that. You have the horizontal lined option that we have on display here, which I would kind of call more classic Aquaterra. 47.5mm on that lug-to-lug makes it where I would say to the larger end of a 40mm case size, so we're slightly smaller here. 150 meters of water resistance, 8,900 movement on the inside. So one of the perks of going for this version, as well as the 41mm case in this instance, is the 8,900 caliber. So that quick set change of that hour hand at that second position when you pull the crown out. The Aquaterra has been a part of the Seamaster collection since 2002 and has quickly become one of the most important pillars for Omega overall. Moving right along and taking a nice jump up here, we have the Vacheron Constantin Overseas 4500V. This is a piece that comes in with a 41mm case. You do have different case sizes here, but this is to its classic form. 11mm in thickness, so pretty thin for an automatic watch with that 5100 caliber on the inside, that 21 karat oscillating weight on the backside with some really nice just texturing and blasting as well as some polishing. 48.2mm on the lug to lug, but it is going to wear it larger than that. This is a large watch. I would say wears like a 42.5 to 43mm on the wrist, 150 meters of water resistance, so more than some of the competition for this integrated style steel sports watch at this tier. The Maltese cross is tied in with that bezel as well as the bracelet, which I would say the bracelet itself is one of the best that you're going to find in the entire industry. Now this watch is essentially unobtainable for many, but I think you have to mention it on a list like this if you're trying to be comprehensive. This is the Patek Phillipe Nautilus 5811 1G. This is the successor to the 5711 that was discontinued in 2022. This has the white gold case coming in with 41mm, 120 meters of water resistance with the 26330 SC movement on the inside, Gyromax balance architecture, 21 karat gold rotor on the flip side, and then moved away from the Geneva seal now with that Patek seal. And this watch is emblematic of now modern day Patek Philippe, as much as so many people associate those classic perpetual calendar chronographs and perpetuals. Nowadays, I think many people, when they think of Patek Philippe, this is the line and family that they think of now. Now we shift to dress watches, and as I mentioned, this isn't going to be as long of a list here compared to some of the other collections that we have in this video, just because dress watches tend to be a bit more refined down and restrained in terms of their case size. Here we have the SRPF 53. This is technically a member of the Cocktail Time family, but is not conventional compared to some of the other rib style finished dials that you'll see. 41.7 millimeters, so definitely not small for that diameter, but with that lug to lug of 47.3 millimeters does wear smaller on wrist. Thickness of 11.5 millimeters, water resistance of only 30 meters for this watch, and then it does have a 4R35 movement. But the star of the show here is this beautiful blue dial. It has this fine grained texture, and one of my favorite aspects of this watch is how that texture is able to find its way on not only the dial backdrop, but also on the top interior side of the indices with some nice finishing in the process. There's just a story being told by this dial, and for a watch that is only $500 or so, which is still a good chunk of change, but compared to many other watches that are multiples of its price, it certainly looks the part. Next, we have Nomos with their Tangente Neomatic update. So this was unveiled in 2021. And what I love about this watch is how they were able to take the DUW caliber, the 6101, which is known for its date wheel that will be usually positioned at the 6 o'clock position in many of their watches. What they did though was basically reverse engineer it. So they have a disc underneath that will have this indication, and instead of having one single aperture, they have a track of apertures and cutouts on the perimeter of the dial, where instead of showing a number, what it will do is we'll have the numbers on the dial, and then that indicator underneath will slide around the dial to show the day that is being specified by the watch itself. Now this is pretty cool to me because it's showing how you can be smart and creative with a movement without creating a whole new movement to be able to pull it off. 41 millimeter case, remarkably thin for a watch of this type, 7.8 millimeters, 49.3 millimeters, so pretty long on the lug to lug end. I would say it wears to the extent of its 41 millimeter case, if not slightly larger. Another point here that is important to mention when talking about Nomos, with their DUW calibers, this is a watch that is going to use their proprietary escapement, their swing system. And just to keep in mind, this idea of a brand making their own escapement is very much unheard of, especially at this price segment. This is not something you will commonly see. I was visiting Nomos and saw that they are a true manufacturer. I think that's one of the things that gets lost on people when they look at Nomos. They think of this design style and this kind of minimalist and very thoughtful approach to what they do and having this clean look. But I think the core of what Nomos is a manufacturer. They produce 95% of their products in-house and their movements. That is remarkable for a brand that only was started in 1990. So for Omega, it's classified into 4 primary pillars. One pillar being the Seamaster, Speedmaster, things I'm sure you're familiar with. Then you have the Constellation, and then finally you have, it's the DeVille. And the DeVille, the problem with the DeVille for so many people is that I think you just get overshadowed by some of these other models that it's hard to really take a look at some of the pieces within this collection. But commercially, this is a very important family for Omega, and I would say it's become a sleeper for Omega by comparison to some of these other collections. And they recently did some nice refreshes with the DeVille line that I am a huge fan of. Some of the prestige lines, they were absolutely fine watches, good value for money, but in terms of really delivering when it comes to separating from the competition, I don't know if they did that as well. This new DeVille line here that we're looking at that comes in with a 41 millimeter case, I like a lot. Power reserve indication, small seconds, 10.8 millimeters in thickness, and a lug to lug under 48 millimeters, so gonna wear like a 40.5 on wrist. And also here you're getting a META certified movement. Some of those other entry level models from the DeVille line did not have this specification, which I think was a big miss. Now seeing this is great. 8810 caliber on the inside with that power reserve indication. These look great, and they have a variety of different dial colors to choose from. I think overall these watches just need more focus and attention. I'd like to do a full video on these in the near future. Next up, we have the Rolex Datejust 41. When I think of the Rolex Datejust, I think of it at 36 millimeters, but still, At 41 millimeters, it is a watch to be reckoned with. 41 millimeter case, 12 millimeters in thickness, and a 47.6 millimeter lug to lug still wears well on the wrist. Depending on whether you go for a smooth bezel option or a fluted bezel option, it almost has an impact on the case size, not based on wear, but just optics on the wrist. If you look at a watch with like a fluted bezel, this has always allowed it to maybe be a bit more flashy, but I've always loved the fluted bezel Jubilee just combination. That's my favorite configuration of the Datejust, but many people, when they go for the 41, I see that you do see more of the smooth bezel option with the oyster bracelet, which, good play, fair play. I think it's a great looking combination as well. 100 meters of water resistance, 32-35 movement on the inside. A legendary watch, dates back to 1945 and still offered in numerous sizes and materials and dial formats. Now we transition into complications, and for 41 millimeters, I want to look at the Longines Hydra Conquest GMT. This is the new GMT watch from Longines, which I think has slid under the radar by comparison to that of the Zulu Time this year. And this watch is under the price. The only reason why it is that is because it does not have a COSC certification, but it has the same caliber on the inside, the L844.5. This is SI balance spring on the inside. You're getting 70 hours of power reserve. Longines is assembling these movements on their site at their manufacturer and headquarters in Switzerland. 49.2 millimeter lug to lug, so is going to wear it like a true 41 on wrist. Phenomenal finishing on these cases, nice dial colors to choose from, and bracelet is quite good. I think these are some of the best buys under $3,000 for just a one do-it-all watch in a GMT format. The next watch is the Christopher Ward Bel Canto. I've been trying to make this mostly around watches of mainstream brands because I think when you're talking about definitive, it's a little bit easier to draw that line, but this watch is so special when it comes to its complication type and where it sits in price, it's hard to dismiss it and not include it on this list. 41 millimeter case size, wears much smaller than that if you've ever worn it. Water resistance is only 30 meters, but when you're getting a complication like this for under $4,000, around the same price as a Tudor Black Bay, it's absolutely nuts. This movement module is going to have 60 additional components to that modular plate to be able to pull this off. The finishing on the dial itself, on the hammer, the bridges is incredible. And this was a watch that nobody was asking for it. Christopher Ward was maybe being put in a box more than they should have been, and I probably was guilty of this. I saw them as making some perfectly fine watches. I didn't know that they had this in them, but when this watch was released, I think many people woke up to be like, wow, Christopher Ward is the real deal, and they are growing quickly and doing a phenomenal job, and this was one of the watches responsible for that. And this is a watch that deserves major kudos for not only what it was able to do for Christopher Ward, but also redefine almost what was possible for these cool complications in this sub $5,000 range. Next, we have the Seiko Speed Timer, and the Speed Timer has a couple of different case sizes that you can choose from. One thing that I think is important to mention is these watches wear so much smaller than what that case size will indicate. I would actually recommend this size as the size to go for so many people, but I think a lot of people like the smaller case sizing of that previous original version, but the 41.5 millimeter wears great on wrist. You have a 45.6 millimeter lug to lug on a 41.5 millimeter watch. That is bonkers. Thickness of 13.2 millimeters, water resistance of 100 meters, and then getting a Seiko quartz movement on the inside with some nice sweeping action with that second hand with a V192 movement. Sapphire crystal, different dial colors to choose from. You're getting kind of the best of both worlds here with a quartz movement and oscillation with solar powered and getting that sweep of the second hand. So I really love this as a great do-it-all chronograph watch, sports chronograph watch under $1,000. Next, we have two Tudor watches that I think absolutely need to be mentioned here. First is the Tudor Black Bay Chrono. This is the watch that to me is representative of one of the best luxury watches in terms of value, not only for a chronograph, but just for a watch in general. Under $6,000, you can get into a beautiful looking chronograph, panda style, non-panda style. 41 millimeter case, wears true to that case size of 49.8 millimeter lug to lug, 14.2 millimeters in thickness, so a little bit on the thicker side, but not too bad. They did some nice creative moves with the dial and where it's seated within the case to pull this off. 200 meters of water resistance, which is nice to see for a chronograph. The MT5813 is a movement that is going to be a fully integrated chronograph movement that was taken from Breitling with the B01. So crazy exchange of technology here between these brands and producing one of the best points of value for an integrated luxury Swiss chronograph in the market. And the other watch here from Tudor I want to mention is the Tudor Black Bay GMT. This is a piece that was unveiled in 2018. At the time of its launch, it was a huge splash. People were going nuts for this watch when it was originally unveiled. And now recently we saw the opaline dial, which evokes that Pan Am mystique dial that so many people will attribute to Rolex and back in the 1950s. 41 millimeters on the thick side at 15 millimeters and a lug-to-lug of 49 millimeters, 200 meters of water resistance, and the MT5652 on the inside that now has seen service in a variety of different GMT watches from Tudor in its current collection. Now we have the Breitling Navitimer B01. I am a growing fan of the Navitimer. The Navitimer was a watch when I first saw it, it never really spoke to me. But then once I started to learn more about its history and its connection to aviation and how it really is one of the most important watches ever made, especially when you're talking about pilot watches, it started to grow on me more and more. And when you look at the core original foundation and ethos around the Navitimer, it just started to make even more sense for me. 41 millimeters for some of you are going to be like, the Navitimer, 41 millimeters, that is not the size for the Navitimer, but that was the original size for the Navitimer. And I think it wears like a dream with some of those new colorful dial options that they came out with. I love the new direction from Breitling in the last 5 or so years since George Kern has taken over. From the product side, I think they're nailing it. I love the Premier collection and what they're doing there. The Navitimer is great. Super Ocean, I think some of their models like the Heritage, I still am a huge fan of. It's one of my favorite dive watches in the luxury segment. There's a lot of watches from Breitling to get lost in, but the Navitimer is the core of what they're all about. And at 41 millimeters, I just love this case size for the Navitimer. Automatic B01 movement on the inside. As I mentioned earlier, just a class-leading integrated chronograph movement from Switzerland that really helps set a standard here. When many people think of IWC, they think of the pilot watches from the brand, but one watch I want to mention here is the IWC Portugieser chronograph. This is one of my favorite looking chronographs on the market from like a dress chrono standpoint. The balance and symmetry of this watch, the beautiful layout, the clean leaf hands on the setup, and you're also looking at a variety of different dial colors. The green dial is simply stunning. This is a watch that doesn't maybe get as much attention as it should because of the other things that IWC does so well with the Pilot collection, but it is one that certainly does deserve a focus here. Wears, I would say, close to that 41 millimeter case size, if not slightly smaller, depending if you get it on the strap or bracelet. And the Portugieser name dates back to the late 1930s. So this is a modern chrono that fuses that classic DNA from IWC that you could argue is almost as rich as their pilot watch history. Now next up we have the Zenith Chronomaster Sport. And the Zenith Chronomaster Sport is a watch that is polarizing because it's a phenomenal watch, no doubt about it. But then it also looks exactly like a Rolex Daytona, very similar. But then what adds to it further and making this a tougher debate is that Zenith was producing movements, the El Primero movement, being housed in the Daytona for over a decade. So, what do you make of this? It's a really weird combination of things to consider when looking at this watch. To me, it comes out at the other end saying that, hey, these are really cool watches, and given what has happened with the Daytona, and then also what you're getting for the movement on the inside with the 3600 caliber, which has a 1/10 of a second with a ceramic bezel, wearable case, I think it's a very coul package altogether. And for our final watch here, we have the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak chronograph. This is a watch that comes in at 41 millimeters, but I would say this watch wears like a 43.5 millimeter to almost 44 millimeter case, given how broad this is across the wrist. But the Royal Oak chronograph is its own idea. There's sometimes when you see the build on of a complication on a watch, it just becomes an additional little side point. This watch really becomes its own thing when you fuse this chronograph with the classic case that is the Royal Oak. 4401 movement on the inside, flyback chronograph movement, 70-hour power reserve, 4 Hertz operation beat frequency, 381 movement components, and even when you take a zoom out, really the finishing for this watch starts with the case. You could argue that this is still one of the best bracelets, if not the best bracelet in all of watchmaking. Just finishing a Royal Oak bracelet can take an artisan more than a full day to complete the job. And that is a time-consuming effort, and it's also a focused effort where you have to make sure you're doing everything to the utmost precision. But all right guys, that is my video here today looking at some of the best watches at 41 millimeters in case size. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Really would appreciate that. Also check out TeddyBaldassarre.com. TeddyBaldassarre.com is a full authorized dealer of over 30 brands, quick and fast fulfillment, dedicated customer support, and a full factory warranty for all the products that we offer. Also, how we're able to fund all the productions here is through selling watches on our site. So if you are in the market for a watch, we would absolutely love to have your business. It allows us to keep doing what we're doing, and we love what we're doing here. But guys, thank you again so much for watching. Be well, and I will see you all very soon.